Hello, my name is Stephanie McGrew, and this is my multicultural presentation. I'm going to be talking about interacting with parents of another culture. We're going to go through a few things here, and I want to go through some of the things I've learned in this class, which is Counseling 5314 from North American University. Okay, so some of the things I'm hoping to cover today and gain some more insight on. We're going to go over our objective here. We're going to talk about what is culture. Before we talk about multiculturalism, we need to have an idea of what an actual person's culture can be, what some examples of cultures are, and what it exactly means. We're going to know the value of differences, so the benefits of living in a multicultural society, why it is important to promote diversity and to have that be a part of our life and as our counseling program. We're thinking about counseling youth or any clients whatsoever. I'm going to be mainly focusing on students because it's my goal eventually to become a school counselor. So if I say students or clients interchangeably, I'm mostly talking about students, and especially in this case, communicating with parents of these students who might be of a different culture or might be of a variety of cultures that we're going to be talking about. We're going to talk about biases and stereotypes. All right, that's going to be a couple of the negative aspects, some of the challenges that we're going to be experiencing in multicultural education. We're going to learn some best practices for how to work with parents in general and work with parents in regards to being culturally aware, working as a multicultural unit. So the counselor, educators, anyone else that is working with people of a different culture can take away these practices, and it'll help them be more well-rounded and a better global citizen, essentially. And then we will close off with some closing thoughts. Okay, so our objective today, this is to reflect and analyze the roles that cultures play in society. We're going to compare and contrast values and challenges of diversity in society. And we're also going to take away helpful techniques and practices to incorporate multicultural understanding in everyday life. So I'm hoping that anyone listening to this presentation can take something away from it that's actually tangible, something that they can do to help become more culturally aware and just to become more educated on the topic in general. That was my goal when we were leaving today. Okay, so what is culture? So our dictionary definition, this is the arts and other manifestations of human intellectual achievement regarded collectively. Okay, so that's kind of the textbook clinical definition. Everyone has an aspect of their culture that makes them unique and influences their life in some way or another. I know I've become guilty of this, thinking that I really don't have a culture, but everyone has a culture of some point or another. It could be many of these examples. These are just a few of the things that we tend to think of when we're talking about culture. It could be something like food that you encounter every day, everyone eats, so that's a part of your culture. What you're making, how you're preparing it, what's in it, what time you're making it, who's making it. That's a simple example of food that's going to be different in every culture that you experience. We have things like religion, different behavior, societal norms, behavior norms, things like that. Rituals and traditions, so that could be tied to religion, that could be tied to holidays, anything like that. Customs, traditions, languages, beliefs, attitudes, art, drama, music. So culture can be a multiple variety of things. It could be how you think, it could be how something is done for you, how your family is made up, the way that you think, an actual physical thing like food, clothing, art, music, things like that. So there are a lot of different aspects that make up a culture. And again, everyone has a culture of some point that affects their life in some way or another, whether we realize it or not. Okay, so advocacy, considerations, and social justice needs. So what we're going to be talking about in this slide, so we have some commonalities versus differences. So what I want to focus on is that culture is often used as an excuse to separate people, but often, many times, cultures are actually quite similar and they're actually connected. They have similar things in common. Often, cultural focus has been more Eurocentric, so focused in Europe, but we're constantly changing. We're becoming a more globalized world, a more diverse world, a world that's more interconnected together, and it's getting smaller every day. The world's shrinking because of communication, the internet, social media, the rise of different celebrities that have become raised awareness of certain things, certain cultures. So this is starting to shift. So the long practices of history, art, music, languages being more Eurocentric, being centered in Europe, is quickly changing, and there are constantly new aspects of other cultures that people are becoming more familiar with. Okay? What we need is for communication and acceptance to grow and to become more mainstream, more normal, to consider the diversity and the needs of others. So we see here in this picture, people are all connected together. Again, currently, we're starting to go down that path, but this is what sort of advocacy needs to be challenged and improved on, is to make sure that we are not just focused on European cultures that are often considered superior in some way, in some instances. No, that's not the case anymore. We need to accept other cultures. We need to learn about other cultures that might be different than people we are currently familiar with. Okay, so the value of difference, so benefits of interacting with different cultures. Yes, it's all just kind of reviewing the benefits of culture. We'll get into some specific practices, some specific things that can be very helpful. So some benefits, some good things that we're going to see from being in a diverse multicultural country, or world, excuse me. Okay, you're going to gain a diverse world view. Okay, so you're not just going to be stuck in your own little world, your own little bubble. You're going to become more aware of how other people think. It might change some of the ways that you think or the ways that you act. It's going to deepen relationship with others if you are familiar with their culture, if you make an effort to understand them, even if you don't necessarily agree with them. Just make that effort, make that interest known that you'd like to get to know them better, to understand them. A person's culture is deeply ingrained in who they are. It determines a lot about them. So knowing about their culture will help you understand the person. So in relations to counseling, if you understand a person's culture, you might be able to help provide them with information that possibly they have not thought of before, or maybe you'll think of other ways that they can accomplish a goal based on the strengths of their culture. So if they're thinking, if a person, for example, is very family oriented, that might be something to consider if you're counseling them about colleges or applying for scholarships, how important academics is. That would be something that would be very useful in this case, to know if someone is very culturally motivated, if they're motivated by academics, are they creative, how does their family system work. That'll be helpful when you're making real contributions and understandings, talking to them what they're going to be, what would be a good path for them to do. Okay, so when you have that deeper relationship and you know what the person's core values are, and you take that step, that's going to really help you help the students, and you're going to get to know them on a more kind of deeper level. Okay, you're going to have improved self-reflection. If you're thinking about other people's cultures, you're also going to reflect on your culture a little bit more. You're going to think of, is that something I really believe, or is it something that is ingrained in me because of my culture, because of my surroundings, because of how I've been raised, etc. It's also going to improve how you think about how you think, essentially. So why do I have these certain viewpoints about a certain group? Is it just an assumption I have? Is it a bias? Is it a stereotype that I hold? Is it actually something that is going to apply to everyone, which is very rare that a whole statement will apply to one group of people. It typically doesn't happen. But if you are aware of these biases, if you're aware of these assumptions that you have, you're going to be able to help your clients or students much better. If you think automatically like, oh, maybe this person would rather do this versus this career, or maybe this is what they're doing, but it's just an assumption that you have, you might give some unrealistic or unhelpful advice for that person if you're making an assumption. It's better to ask questions, get to know the person, figure out what's going to be the best fit for them, and not just simply making an assumption. That's where unethical thoughts and behaviors come into play because these ethics, we have these preconceived notions, and if we're not careful, we don't recognize these biases, it can really hurt us and it can hurt the students as well that we are trying to help. So just everyone thinking, oh, I don't see differences between anybody, I don't have any biases. That's not true. Everyone has a bias. Everyone has some sort of experience with other cultures that can change either for the benefit in a positive way or a negative way. So just recognizing those biases, you're going to understand yourself more and why you think the way you do, and that's going to help you help others that are from a different culture than you. Okay, you're going to experience unique experiences because if you are open to other cultures, if you want to expose yourself to different ways of life that are different than you, different traditions, different holidays, different religions, different foods, music, or art, you're going to have a much more varied variety experience in whatever you're talking about instead of just staying in your own little world. It's going to help you change the way you think a little bit. It might kind of open your worldview and think about things in a way you've never experienced before. Okay, and that's going to lead to a more varied society. When we have all different types of people, different thoughts, different cultures coming together, that is what makes life interesting. Okay, if everyone was all the same, many innovations, inventions, techniques, practices would not have come about if everyone was just thinking exactly the same way. So obviously, interacting with these different cultures are going to be extremely helpful and extremely useful to society as a whole because variety is the spice of life. Okay, I want to show this short video that really captures how I feel about culture. This was a John Cena ad that's just a few minutes long. I think I would show in a presentation like this. It's very good. It shows kind of a good, well-rounded what the idea of a melting pot would be.
Julius Lockings, we need you at the front office. Julius Lockings, please come to the front office.
Patriotism. There's a word thrown around a lot. It inspires passionate debate. It's worn like a badge of honor, and with good reason. Because it means love and devotion for one's country. Love. For a word designed to unite, it can also be pretty divisive. See, there's more to patriotism than flag seating with onesies and rodeos and quadruple cheeseburgers. Patriotism is love for a country, not just pride. But what really makes up this country of ours? What is it we love? It's more than just a huge rock full of animals like cougars and eagles, right? It's the people. Do me a favor. Close your eyes for a second. I want to try something. Picture the average U.S. citizen. Think about it. How old are they? What's their hair like? How much can they bench? Got one? Okay. So chances are, the person you're picturing right now looks a little different than the real average American. There are 319 million U.S. citizens. 51% are female. So first off, the average American is a woman. Cool, huh? Is that what you pictured? 54 million are Latino, 40 million senior citizens, 27 million are disabled, 18 million are Asian. That's more people in the U.S. that play football and baseball combined. 9 million are lesbian, gay, bi, transgender, more than the entire amount of people that live in the state of Virginia. Around 10 million are redhead, 5.1 million play ultimate frisbee, and 3.5 million are Muslim. Triple the number of people currently serving in the United States military. Almost half the country belongs to minority groups. People who are lesbian, African American, and bi, and transgender, and Native American, and proud of it. We know that labels don't devalue us, they help define us, keeping us dialed into our cultures and our beliefs and who we are as Americans. After all, what's more American than freedom to celebrate the things that make us, us? I mean, it's stitched into the stars and stripes of this country. From the Constitution to Gettysburg, to our motto, E pluribus unum, from many, one. It's even in our country's name, the United States. This year, patriotism shouldn't just be about pride of country. It should be about love. Love beyond age, disability, sexuality, race, religion, and any other labels. Because the second any of us judge people based on those labels, we're not really being patriotic, are we? So let's try this one more time. Close your eyes. Picture the average Joe or Joan or Juan or Jean-Luc. The real people who make America, America. And this year, maybe you feel the urge to don those star-spangled shorts and set off fireworks the size of my biceps to show love for our country. Remember that to love America is to love all Americans. Because love has no labels.
Okay, so that is one of my favorite videos. I think it perfectly summarizes what it means to truly aim for a multicultural society, what that means, what that looks like. So I just think that video is really good. So I would include that in my presentation. Let's talk about the relevance of this issue. So why is this a multicultural issue? I don't think there's anybody that has not had an experience that, I don't think there's anybody in the world right now that has gone their whole lives without experiencing some sort of negative comment, either they heard it towards another group or maybe it was directed to them personally, whether it's an article maybe they read or someone said something directly to them. So this is why I'm talking about this issue, because this is a world that is, again, becoming ever smaller, it's becoming ever more connected, which can have a lot of benefits, but it's also going to bring up some issues with people who are not willing to see the benefits of a varied society. So I want to make sure that we understand why having a variety of cultures is important, and why it is important to know some good strategies and techniques to working with people who are of a different culture than you. Okay, so with our benefits, along with that, there are some real-world challenges that I'd like to talk about that we're going to see. Okay, and hopefully as counselors we can help address these issues, help fix these issues. Alright, so we have our personal biases and stereotypes. Like I mentioned before, everyone has a bias, everyone has an opinion against another group, either indirectly that they have heard about or heard other people say, or directly an experience that they've had with someone. And I think one of the most damaging things that can happen to a culture is assuming that the action of one person represents that of a whole group. I think that's where a lot of danger lies and a lot of issues come, is assuming that just because one group or a few people acted that way, that everyone in that culture or that religion, that country, etc., that they are going to act the same way. Assumptions often do not work out very well, so I want us to understand that we are going to have personal biases, we are going to have personal stereotypes just by being human, by having experiences. Even if it's not necessarily completely negative, we are going to have an opinion, we're going to have a bias. Bias isn't always negative. Bias means that you have your opinion, that you think one way because of your personal experiences and things that you've done. Okay, stereotypes, that's when it becomes a little bit more negative. It's when you're making an assumption without even knowing a person, without hearing anything about them, without knowing them, you're making an assumption on them. That's what we want to avoid in counseling. We don't want to make stereotypes about a certain group or a certain person, what they would want, what they don't want, just because of our preconceived notion. We need to make that effort and really get to know the person and make sure we are giving them good, solid advice. Again, then after that we have racism and prejudice. Many cultures have to overcome things like that. It's been historically, they've had to overcome it, or maybe even currently they're still feeling the aftermath or the consequences of racism and prejudice, putting some cultures at a disadvantage and putting some cultures at an advantage over another. So we have to be aware of these things, aware of these challenges that we are facing before we even get into trying to solve the issue and trying to help people as counselors. We also are dealing with a lack of knowledge. Okay, so sometimes people honestly don't know a lot about a culture, so maybe it's something that they're not very familiar with, maybe they haven't traveled very much, maybe that's not something that they're interested in, so they might just honestly not know a lot about somewhere. A lack of exposure, so again, maybe they don't have the resources to travel, they are in an area where there's not a lot of diversity, so you kind of stay in that area, you're able to stay in your own little bubble without being exposed to other viewpoints. And you have a lack of education also, so if you don't have that exposure, you're not going to be able to get educated from someone firsthand about their culture, about what their life is like. And that's the best way to do it, is to actually just talk to people instead of reading books, and everything is great, that's a great way to start. But really having those personal conversations with people, that's going to be the way that multiculturalism grows and becomes more accepted. Okay, so now we've gotten a lot of our background information, some of the benefits, challenges that we are facing, and what culture is exactly what we're going to be looking at. So I want to talk about some best practices, so how would I address these needs as a counselor myself, and what are some pieces of advice that I would personally give to other counselors, or really anyone in education, anyone working that would honestly be working with people. This can be very beneficial in general. Okay, so I'm currently a teacher, so I wanted to break down a little bit what are some best practices of working with parents in general, and then kind of taking a step forward a little bit and specifically talking about parents of parents who are multicultural, or parents that might be different than what you're familiar with. So some best practices for talking with just some general best practices for parents. Okay, the first one, all parents want their children to be successful, so focus on strengths as well as weaknesses. You don't want to go in and just talk all negative and kind of have them feel defeated. You want to make sure, you do want to address the issues, of course, and you don't want to sugarcoat things or make it that you're not communicating the point that you wanted to solve. But it is important to try and find at least one or two positive things as you are addressing these issues as well. Because no parent wants to come in and just feel completely defeated. That's my recommendation, is doing some positive feedback as well. Be specific as possible, give examples that raise concerns for you. That's one thing that I found, that instead of just saying, your student is, not motivated, they're not doing work in their classes, that would be an issue that maybe you would have to talk to a parent about as either a teacher or a counselor if you're talking about grades. So if you have specific examples either that you've seen firsthand or examples from the teacher, if you're a counselor and you don't see the student every day, if you say something like, in this instance there was a group project and your student didn't contribute work to it, didn't do their fair share of it. We were doing this, their job was this, and he or she did not fill out that section. That's very specific, that's an individual instance. If you have a couple of those that lie along those lines, it's really good to build up with examples and give those direct information, those direct feedback. Okay, be open and ask questions, do not just lecture at the parent. So don't keep it as a dialogue, don't just say this is what's going on, this is what I need to happen. Have a conversation, ask them questions, ask them what is something you can tell me that could help your student be successful. Is there any insight, anything about their home life, anything that you'd be willing to share with me to help them be successful? So again, be really open and ask these questions. Don't just ask like you know all the answers, you know what's right, because there might be some insight that parent or guardian or the student themselves could actually give you to help them be successful, so they will know what they can do for you. Okay, it's really good to end on a positive note. Alright, so again, kind of going back to the first point here, it's really important when you're solving a problem to build that rapport, build that relationship with the parents. So you don't want them to end leaving your classroom, leaving your presence, feeling completely deflated. I would say always start with a positive and kind of end with a positive. That was my personal advice on that, because you want them to feel good about that there are some steps that are being taken, that there is a solution at hand. you don't want them to walk away feeling helpless and thinking that there's no way to help their child. That's not going to help anybody. That's not going to help your relationship improve. Okay? Also, determine a specific course of action and procedures to ensure the action is followed. So don't just let them walk away and say, make sure your student does their homework, make sure they do this and this. You want to be really specific. Say, okay, this week we're doing this. I'd really like to see the effort increase, become more motivated, and let's check back via email or phone call if you want to come in and meet. That's what I would recommend to make sure that there's actually a plan in place. This is what I'm expecting from the student. This is what's going to happen if they don't follow through with this. So have a direct course of action that can be taken, and then have actual follow-through procedures of what's going on. Okay, so those were kind of general practices for parents, working with parents, students in general, or the parents of students in general. Now I want to talk a little bit more about multicultural parents, how to figure out how to work with a culture that's different that you might not be familiar with. Okay, a really important one for me is to do your research. Okay, so I'm not saying that a teacher or a counselor has to read up on every single thing of that culture. So say you have a Hispanic student or something and you're going to be talking to their parents. I'm not expecting someone that doesn't know Spanish to learn Spanish overnight, or to be completely familiar with Hispanic culture or history, anything like that. But it is a good idea to do your research a little bit to kind of go in knowing what the student is going to need and how you can best serve that culture. Okay? Doing this, you want to be organized beforehand, so if there is an interpreter needed, that's a good arrangement to have before they even come in, knowing that you want to communicate clearly with them, so you took that extra effort to get someone in to help you out, so so everyone in the meeting can understand what's going on. Okay, if that's not necessary, figure out before. If it's not necessary, that's great. It can just be you and the parents or the student. But if an interpreter is needed, then that's a really good thing to do beforehand. Okay, familiarize yourself with that culture's family structure. Okay, so again, I'm focusing mostly on students here, so it's really good to have an idea. Again, without avoiding stereotypes or prejudices, it is a good idea to have a basic understanding of how that student's family structure works. Is there a parent that they're closer to? Is there a parent that tends to make more of the decisions about school, other ones that make the decision about money? What role does the student have with the parent? Does the student take on a lot of responsibilities at home? Do they take care of other children, other family, things like that? So again, without showing prejudice or making assumptions, it is a really good idea to have at least an idea of what you might be getting into. And then following up with that, asking questions. That's going to help solidify your familiarity with the structure. So if you are asking questions, it also opens that dialogue and shows that you're interested in what that person, what their family, what they're coming from, what they're experiencing, what they're going through. So again, opening up that dialogue and asking, people like to talk about aspects of their culture, and that's a great thing that you can build those relationships or building those bonds. Okay, acknowledge your own biases and preconceived notions beforehand. Okay, everyone has them. Again, it doesn't mean that people are, you're a bad person for having a bias or having a prejudice. It's human nature, it's going to happen. But it's important to acknowledge that you have them instead of just ignoring them, and then using that as a tool to make sure that you give the best service, the best care to the student and their family. Okay, by acknowledging these biases, you can work towards not letting them impact your advice, and it helps you remain ethical. So again, you're not just making an assumption about somebody, you're trying to move past those biases, acknowledge them, and then use other techniques to work to help serve that parent or that student. Okay, so for some closing thoughts, what I would have people think about is reflect on these couple things. So what can I do to improve my cultural awareness? Is there maybe festival or event that I could attend that's something that's completely different than what I'm used to, just to get myself a little bit of exposure to other cultures and places? Is there some literature I can read? Is it simple? Could you listen to some different music on your way home? Can you read different books from different authors, different poetry, different food, anything that you are interested in doing? What can I do to improve my cultural awareness? And how can I use my position and privilege to help others? So, like I talked about at the beginning a little bit, everyone's going to have their own situation, their own culture. Some of them are going to be some cultures are more at advantage in certain scenarios, and some are at disadvantage. So if you are in a position where your culture tends to be more accepted, practiced more, and you're part of the majority that has more privilege, what can you do to help others that might not have the same advantages that you have? That's something that I think will really help moving forward, help people become more culturally aware, is using their voice to advocate for others. Okay, there are many cultures that offer a great deal of insight, a lot of aspects that could really help our diverse world. And how can you use your position, your voice, your resources, something as simple as, maybe bringing a different type of dish to a family event or something, just to kind of pique people's interest and get the conversation going. So this is essentially the end of my presentation. I have some research here. I have some research here and some references that I use to help guide my presentation. Thank you very much for listening, and I hope you have a wonderful day.